The diner on the edge of the Trans-Canada Highway wasn't the kind of place anyone chose. It was the kind of place you ended up. Lena Beausoleil had worked the overnight shift at Ridgeline Diner for 3 years. She knew the sound of every truck that pulled off Route 11 before dawn. She knew which regulars took their coffee black, which ones needed 2 sugars to face the cold, and which ones left without tipping, because the world had already taken enough from them that they didn't think they owed anyone anything. She did not know the sound of a child crying quietly in the women's washroom at 4:17 in the morning, until the night she heard it. Before we get into what happened next, and trust me, you're going to want to stay until the end, because what Alina discovered in that washroom changed the course of both their lives forever. Don't forget to like this video, hit that subscribe button, and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from tonight. Now let's go back to that highway diner, and to the little girl who had been sitting on that cold tile floor for longer than anyone should have to. Her name was Maisie. She was 7 years old, and she hadn't made a sound for the 4 hours she'd been in there because her father had told her not to. The Trans-Canada in late November is a kind of loneliness that people who've never driven it can't fully understand. The sky comes down low and the trees press in from both sides, and the highway just keeps going and going and going in both directions like it doesn't believe in destinations. Ridgeline Diner sat at the junction of Route 11 and a county road that didn't appear on most maps anymore, the kind of junction that existed only for people who already knew where they were going. Lena Beausoleil had grown up 2 towns east. She'd meant to leave for university, and then her mother got sick, and then her mother got better, and by the time she looked up, she was 26, and still wearing the same green apron, and still refilling the same coffee mugs, and still watching the highway through the same smeared window above the counter. She wasn't unhappy. That was the thing people always assumed. She was just still in the way of a lake before a storm, waiting for something, without knowing what. She heard the crying at 4:17 because she'd gone to the supply room to get a new roll of receipt paper, and the women's washroom shared a wall. It was the softest sound, the kind of sound a child makes when they've learned that crying loudly doesn't help. Small, controlled, practiced. That detail was what stopped her cold in the hallway. She knocked gently on the washroom door. Nothing. "Hey," she said, keeping her voice low, "the way you speak to something frightened. I work here. I'm not going to hurt you. I just want to make sure you're okay." Silence. "I'm going to come in, all right? Just to check." The door wasn't locked. The little girl was sitting on the floor between the vanity and the wall, knees pulled to her chest, a backpack in her lap. She had dark hair and pale skin and eyes that were red from crying but dry now. She looked up at Lena like she was calculating something. "My dad said not to talk to anyone," she said. Lena crouched down slowly, making herself smaller. "Your dad told you to stay here?" The little girl nodded. "How long ago was that?" She had to think about it. When it was still light outside, Lena felt something cold move through her. It had been dark since 5 o'clock. It was now past 4 in the morning. That was 11 hours. 11 hours on a washroom floor. "What's your name, sweetheart?" A pause. A calculation. "Maisie. Maisie." Lena sat down on the floor beside her, back against the wall, the same way the girl was sitting. Eye level, non-threatening. "I'm Lena. Are you hungry?" For the first time, the girl's composure cracked just a little. Her chin dipped. "Yes." Lena stood and held out her hand. "Come on then. I'll make you something. You can sit where I can see you from the counter, and if your dad comes back, you'll see him right away through the window. Deal?" Maisie thought about it for a very long moment. Then she took her hand. The man who walked into Ridgeline Diner at 5:40 in the morning was not Maisie's father. Lena knew every face that came through that door. She had a memory for faces the way some people have memory for names or numbers. She remembered the truck drivers, and the contractors, and the couples mid-argument, and the solo travelers who never made eye contact. She remembered faces. She did not recognize the man who came in at 5:40, and she noticed immediately that he was too clean for the hour, too still, that his eyes moved across the room before his body did, cataloging exits and occupants in the practiced, automatic way of someone who had been doing it for a very long time. He sat at the far end of the counter, ordered black coffee, and looked at Maisie, not in the way of a stranger noticing a child, in the way of a man confirming something he already knew. Lena set the coffee in front of him without speaking. She let the silence sit. "Rough night?" the man finally said. He was looking at his cup. "Quiet enough." Lena wiped down the counter. "Yours?" "Long." He turned the cup in his hands. "That your daughter?" "Niece," Lena said. The lie came out without her planning it. Smooth and certain, like she'd practiced it. She didn't look at Maisie. She held the man's gaze instead. Something shifted in his eyes, not surprise, more like recalibration. He left 20 minutes later without finishing his coffee. Lena watched his car, a dark gray SUV, no front plate, pull back onto Route 11 heading west. Then she went and sat beside Maisie and said, very calmly, "Has your dad ever shown you a photo of the people he works with?" The girl reached into her backpack and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a photograph, printed on regular copy paper. 4 men standing in front of what looked like a warehouse. The man who'd just left the diner was standing on the far right. At the bottom of the photo, in her father's handwriting, "If you see any of these men, you find the nearest woman and you stay with her until I come." The nearest woman had been Lena Beausoleil. His name was Callum Ashford, and she found that out 3 hours later when a black Range Rover pulled into the Ridgeline lot, and a man climbed out, who took up more of the doorframe than seemed physically reasonable. He was tall in the way that certain men are tall, not just in height but in presence, like the room rearranged itself around him. Dark coat, no tie, jaw set like poured concrete. He scanned the diner in exactly the same way the man at 540 had done, but faster, and with the look of someone who had found the exits lacking every room he'd ever entered. His eyes landed on Maisie, and for just a moment, one single moment, every hard line of his face dissolved into something else entirely. He crossed the diner in 6 steps. He crouched down in front of her, this enormous man folding himself small, and he took her face in both hands and looked at her the way you look at something you thought you'd lost. "You're okay," he said. It wasn't a question. It was him telling himself. "I did what Daddy said," Maisie told him. "I found a woman and I stayed with her." He closed his eyes for a half-second. Then he looked up at Lena. Callum Ashford had gray eyes the color of the sky outside in November. They weren't warm eyes, but they were eyes that paid attention. Eyes that were already putting things together. "You kept her safe," he said. "She was hungry," Lena said. "I made her eggs." Something moved across his face. She couldn't name it. He stood, and just like that, the contained, controlled man was back. He pulled out a card and set it on the counter. "My name is Callum Ashford. I need you to tell me everything that happened since you found her. Every person who came in, every conversation, everything." Lena looked at the card. No title, no company, just a name and a number. "I'm going to need you to tell me who you are first," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. Most people, she suspected, didn't push back on Callum Ashford. She could tell by the slight shift in his expression. Not annoyance, but something closer to surprised respect. "Her uncle," he said finally. "Her father he's in trouble. And I'm the person he called when he needed her safe. Is her father alive?" The pause before his answer was a fraction too long. "As of 2 hours ago." Lena sat down across from him and folded her hands on the table. Then start talking. What she learned over the next 40 minutes was this: Maisie's father, his name was Thomas, he was 32. He drove long-haul routes between Ontario and British Columbia, had been carrying something in his truck for the past 8 months that he hadn't fully understood when he agreed to carry it. Packages, he'd been told. Industrial parts. The money was good, and his wife had left 18 months ago, and Maisie's daycare wasn't cheap. He didn't ask enough questions. By the time he understood what he was actually moving, documents, financial records belonging to an organization that Callum Ashford described only as people who don't like loose ends, he was already too deep to simply walk away. 3 weeks ago, Thomas had started making copies of everything that passed through his hands. He hadn't told anyone. He'd mailed the copies to a post office box in Thunder Bay, under a name that didn't belong to him. Last night, someone had found out. "He called me from a gas station outside Wawa," Callum said. "He had maybe 10 minutes before they found him. He told me where to find Maisie, and he told me she'd have a photograph, and that she'd already know what to do with it." He looked at the little girl, who was eating her second piece of toast at the counter with the gravity of a child taking a very important exam. He trained her for this, just in case. Lena sat with that for a moment. A father who'd made terrible choices and then spent months quietly preparing his daughter for the possibility that those choices might cost him everything. Not abandonment, the opposite of it. The man who came in at 5:40, she said. He was looking for her. I know. Callum's jaw tightened. He'll have reported back by now, so they know she was here. They know she was here as of 5:40. They don't know where she is now. He looked at Lena steadily. But they saw your face. The words landed with a weight she hadn't anticipated. What does that mean? She asked, keeping her voice even. It means, Callum Ashford said, that you're involved now, whether you plan to be or not. Lena looked out the window at the highway. The sky was getting lighter in the east, that particular gray-pink of a Canadian winter morning that never quite promised anything. A transport truck rolled past without slowing. She thought about the way Maisie had taken her hand, the calculation in those 7-year-old eyes, the same calculation she must have used to decide whether Lena could be trusted. The way she'd said, "I did what Daddy said." The matter-of-fact dignity of a child who'd been sitting on a cold tile floor for 11 hours and hadn't screamed for help because her father had told her not to, and she trusted her father. "What do you need?" Lena said. Something changed in Callum's expression again. She was starting to learn to read the small variations. This one she thought might be relief, worn down to almost nothing, tucked behind everything else he was carrying. "I need to get Maisie somewhere safe. I have a property 2 hours north. No one knows about it. It's not connected to anything. But I can't travel with a child alone right now. It'll draw attention. A man with a little girl is a story. A man with a woman and a little girl is just a family." Lena considered him for a long moment. "And what am I supposed to tell my manager? Tell him a family emergency came up. I don't have family emergencies. I'm very reliable." "Tell him," Callum said, and for the first time there was something at the edge of his voice that almost sounded like dry humor, that your judgment was temporarily compromised by a 7-year-old and a compelling set of circumstances. Lena stood up, untied her apron, and went to make a phone call. The property was 2 hours north of Ridgeline, accessible by a logging road that Callum navigated from memory in the dark. The main road turned to gravel. The gravel turned to packed dirt. The dirt became a track through snow-weighted spruce trees that pressed close enough to brush the sides of the Range Rover. Maisie fell asleep with her backpack still clutched in her arms 10 minutes into the drive. Lena sat in the passenger seat and watched the trees and said nothing. She was not afraid, exactly. She was aware that she probably should have been. She was sitting in a vehicle owned by a man whose last name she'd known for less than 2 hours, driving into the northern Ontario wilderness, and she'd left without telling anyone where she was going. By every reasonable metric, this was a catastrophic decision. But she kept thinking about that photograph. If you see any of these men, you find the nearest woman, and you stay with her. Thomas had trusted that there would be a woman, that there would be someone who would see a child and not look away. He'd built his emergency plan around the hope that kindness existed in the world, even at 4 a.m. on the Trans-Canada in November. Lena found that harder to walk away from than she would have expected. "How long have you been doing this?" she asked, when the silence had run long enough. "Doing what? Whatever it is you do." Callum kept his eyes on the road. "Longer than I should have. Is that an answer?" "It's the honest version of one." A pause. 20 years, give or take, and Thomas. He knew what you were when he called you. He knew I was someone who keeps his word. Is that how you'd describe yourself? He was quiet for a moment. The trees streamed past on both sides, dark and close. "No," he said. "I'd describe myself as someone who's made a long series of choices that made sense at the time." Another pause. "Thomas is my cousin. When we were kids, he followed me into everything. Every stupid decision I made, he was 3 steps behind me. He trusted me because I was older and because he didn't know better." His hands shifted on the wheel. "This is different. This time he called me because I'm the only person he knows who can actually fix it. Can you?" He didn't answer right away. Through the trees, Lena could see the shapes of a building resolving out of the darkness. A cabin, large, low, no lights is on. He pulled up in front of it and cut the engine. "I'm going to try," he said. The cabin had power and running water, and a wood stove that Callum had lit and running within 15 minutes, while Lena got Maisie settled into one of the bedrooms. The little girl had woken up disoriented, but she hadn't cried. She had looked around the room with those careful eyes and said, "Is Uncle Callum here?" "Right outside," Lena said. Maisie nodded, as though this was sufficient information. She lay down on the bed and pulled the quilt up to her chin. "He always comes," she said, more to herself than to Lena. "Daddy says Uncle Callum always comes." Lena sat with her until she fell back asleep. Then she went out to the main room where Callum was on the phone, standing very still near the window, speaking in a low voice she couldn't make out. When he hung up, she said, "What did you find?" He turned. "Thomas is in RCMP custody." The words arrived like cold water. "Is that good?" "Better than the alternative." He sat down at the table. For the first time since she'd met him, he looked tired. Not in his posture was still controlled, still deliberate, but around his eyes. He turned himself in 3 hours ago. He walked into the detachment in Wawa and told them everything. Names, dates, locations, the post office box in Thunder Bay. The corner of his mouth moved. He'd already made 3 copies of everything and mailed them to 3 separate addresses before he called me. He planned that too. Thomas is meticulous. It's the thing about him that drove everyone crazy when we were kids. He plans everything. He just planned the wrong things for a while. Lena sat down across from him. The wood stove was beginning to put out real heat. Outside, the wind had picked up, and she could hear it in the spruce trees, that particular northern sound, like the forest breathing. Are they going to protect him? If the evidence holds, they don't have a choice. He's given them enough to dismantle something that the RCMP has been trying to get to for 4 years. He turned his coffee cup in his hands. The same gesture she noticed as the man at the counter this morning. Same hands. Different everything else. His testimony combined with those documents, it's significant. And Maisie? She stays with me until Thomas is in a safe location. Could be a few days, could be 2 weeks. He looked at her directly. And you? She raised her eyebrows. The man who came into the diner will have passed your description along. You're connected to Maisie now, which means you're connected to this. His voice was matter-of-fact but not indifferent. I'm sorry. I know you didn't choose that. I chose to sit down on that washroom floor, Lena said. He was quiet for a moment. You could have called the police and gone back to work. She was 7 and she was scared and she'd been there since yesterday afternoon. I know. Something in his voice. I know. Lena looked at the fire through the grate of the wood stove. She thought about Ridgeline Diner, the smeared window over the counter, the highway going in both directions, the particular quality of waiting she'd been living inside for years without naming it. I have a cousin in Sudbury, she said. I was going to visit her for Christmas. I was going to take the bus. Callum said nothing. I suppose I can call her and tell her I've been delayed by circumstances. I'll make sure you get there, he said. After this is done, I'll make sure you get wherever you're going. She looked at him. In the firelight, with the exhaustion showing around his eyes and his hands wrapped around a coffee cup, he looked like a man carrying something very heavy over a very long distance. She recognized that. She'd seen it in her own face often enough. You keep your promises, she said. Not a question. It's one of the few things I'm consistent about. A pause. Thomas mentioned it when he called me. He said he'd built the whole plan around it. The fact that if I told him I'd come for Maisie, I would come for Maisie. He was betting her safety on my consistency. His jaw shifted. I want to call that faith, but I think it's more accurate to call it a long track record. From the bedroom, Maisie made a small sound in her sleep and then went quiet again. Lena and Callum sat with the fire between them and the wind in the trees outside, and the particular silence of people who have been through something together and have not yet decided what to call it. The RCMP contacted Callum at just past noon the next day. Thomas Beaumont was in protective custody in Sudbury. The documents in Thunder Bay had been retrieved. The organization Thomas had been working for, a financial network spanning 3 provinces, with ties to money laundering operations that the Federal Organized Crime Unit had been trying to crack for years, was in the process of being dismantled faster than anyone had anticipated. Thomas's documentation was, apparently, extraordinary, meticulous. The word the officer used was comprehensive. Callum relayed all of this to Lena in the main room, while Maisie sat at the kitchen table, drawing pictures of what appeared to be horses with their names written beneath them in very careful block letters. "So it's over?" Lena said. "For Thomas? The worst of it, yes, there'll be proceedings. Testimony, probably relocation, at least for a while. He was quiet for a moment, but he'll be alive to do it." Maisie looked up from her drawing. "Can I talk to him?" Callum crossed to her and crouched down, the same movement Lena had seen him make in the diner. This large, controlled man folding himself down to a child's level with the ease of someone who'd done it many times before. "In a few hours," he said. "They need to set it up safely. But yes." She studied him with those dark two-wise eyes. "Were you scared?" He considered it seriously the way she'd asked it seriously. "Yes. I was scared something had happened to you before I could get there." "I wasn't scared," Maisie said. "I was sad. There's a difference." "There is," he agreed. "You're right." She looked back at her drawing and added ears to one of the horses. "Lena was nice. She made me eggs twice, and she sat on the floor with me in the bathroom, so I wouldn't feel weird about being on the floor." Callum looked at Lena over the top of the little girl's head. There was something in his expression that she didn't have a name for, something layered and careful. "She did," he said. He drove Lena to Sudbury 4 days later, on a Thursday morning when the sky was flat white and the road was clear. Maisie was with Thomas by then, an emotional, messy 40-minute phone call 2 nights ago that Lena had given them privacy for, standing outside in the cold with her breath-making clouds, looking up at a sky so full of stars it looked almost reckless. Thomas had cried. Maisie had told him very seriously that she had followed the plan exactly and that he should have put more crackers in her backpack. Callum had stood in the doorway and listened and had not said anything at all, but Lena had seen his hand press flat against the doorframe for a moment, as though he needed something to hold. The drive to Sudbury took 3 hours. They talked in the loose, unhurried way of people who have already gotten through the hard part together. He asked about her life in a way that suggested he was actually curious. She asked about his work in a way that suggested she understood he couldn't answer most of it. They talked about Thomas, about Maisie, about the particular stubbornness of certain children who refused to be broken by things that would break most adults. At one point, somewhere north of Espanola, Lena said, "You're not what I expected." He glanced at her sideways. "What did you expect?" "I don't know exactly. Someone colder, maybe. Someone more certain they were the hero of the story." He was quiet for a long moment. The highway unrolled ahead of them, pale and straight. "I've never thought of myself as a hero," he said finally. "I'm just someone who knows which debts matter." She looked at him. "And this was a debt?" Another long pause. "No," he said. "This was something else." She didn't ask him what. She let it sit there between them on the bench seat, which felt, for reasons she couldn't fully explain, like the right thing to do. He didn't just drop her at her cousin's door. He walked her to it, carried the bag she'd grabbed from her apartment 2 days ago when his driver had made a quick stop in town. Her cousin Adele opened the door and looked at Callum Ashford in the way that people always looked at Callum Ashford when they first encountered him, with a startled recalibration followed by rapid reassessment. "Lena," Adele said. "You said family emergency." "I did," Lena said. "This is a whole thing. It's mostly resolved now." Adele looked at Callum again. He returned the look with the calm, neutral patience of someone who had been assessed and found wanting many times and had made his peace with it. "I'll leave you to it," he said. He handed Lena a card, a different card this time, with a personal number written on the back in pen. "If anything comes up, if anyone bothers you, if you need anything." She took it. He turned to go. "Callum." She said his name without thinking. He turned back. "Thank you for coming for her." His eyes held hers for a moment. "I told Thomas I would. I know. That's what I mean." He stood there for just a beat longer than necessary. Then something at the corner of his mouth shifted, barely visible, but there, he nodded once, got back in his car, drove away into the flat white Sudbury afternoon without looking back, which is the way she would later understand that certain people leave, Not because they're walking away from something, but because they've learned that the only way to keep going is to not watch what you're leaving behind. 2 years later, Lena Beausoleil got a Christmas card, no return address, but she recognized the handwriting. Inside, a photograph of Maisie in a red sweater, standing in front of a Christmas tree, missing one front tooth, grinning so hard her eyes had almost disappeared. On the back, she told me to send this to the lady who made eggs. She said you'd want to see how she turned out. And below that, in a different pen, in very careful block letters, "Thank you for sitting on the floor with me." Maiselina pinned it to the wall above the counter at Ridgeline Diner. It hung there through January and February and the long gray tunnel of March. Truckers asked about it sometimes. She told them it was from her niece. She watched the highway through the smeared window and thought about Thomas Beaumont, meticulous and frightened, building a plan out of faith. Faith that his daughter was brave enough to wait, and that a stranger would be kind enough to stay. She thought about the way Callum had said this was Somersel's and left it there between them, unfinished, and how that had felt less like an ending than like a door left open on purpose. She thought about the fact that she still had his card, that she'd moved it from her jacket pocket to her wallet without quite deciding to. People pass through diners on the Trans-Canada the way water passes through a filter, leaving some things behind, carrying others forward. Most of the time you never know which you are, the container or the thing being carried. But sometimes, not often, not usually, but sometimes, a child sits down on a cold tile floor and refuses to make a sound, and a woman sits down beside her, and something shifts in the world. Something small and quiet and stubborn as the northern light coming up in the east over a highway that goes on forever. Sometimes you don't find what you've been waiting for by going looking. Sometimes it knocks on a washroom door at 4:17 in the morning, holding a backpack that's too heavy for it, and says very quietly, "My dad said to find a woman and stay." And everything that comes after, every cold mile and hard choice and careful promise kept. It all begins with someone deciding that this, right here, is exactly where they were always supposed to be. Before you go, if this story stayed with you, leave a comment below and tell me where you're watching from tonight. And if you know someone who needed a reminder that kindness in the right moment can change everything, share this with them. Subscribe to Sadie's Romance Library for a new story every week, and I'll see you in the next one.